Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Today, we're here with Joseph Kitchen of the Maryland Young Democrats, who is the president of this statewide organization. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Awesome. So the first question I'd like to pose to you today is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
So what we're currently doing with the Young Democrats in Maryland is right now we're preparing for the election. We have about 2 weeks left to go, and we are recruiting and getting as many young people to not only plan to vote and register to vote and ready to vote early, but we're also sending dozens of them to Pennsylvania every week to knock on doors and get people out to vote in Pennsylvania, which we view as the firewall for Hillary Clinton's election. And then also throughout the week, we have young people in Montgomery, Prince George's, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County leading phone banks every single week. So that's our top priority.
Okay. So you've become president of the statewide Young Dems. Now, there are county chapters of the Young Democrats?
That's correct.
And across many different states?
So there are, here in Maryland, we have county chapters. And the rest of the states, they're broken down in different ways. So I originally come from California. And when I was in California and I was a member of the California Young Democrats, they were broken down by cities.
Okay.
But in Maryland, our counties play a more prominent role than our cities. In California, it's the reverse way.
So how did you get involved in the Young Democrats, and why?
It's a crazy story. So I joined the Young Democrats. I got involved in politics and then the Young Democrats when I was 13. I was
really young.
Really young. I was in school. I was in high school. Just going into high school as a little kid, just going into high school, 9th grade. And a friend of mine's older brother wanted to run for the Fresno City Council. And if you know anything about California politics, Fresno is the 5th largest city in California. So it's a pretty decent-sized city. And but it's in the Central Valley, a lot of farming, agriculture communities. And my friend's brother wanted to run for the city council. And his brother was early 20s at the time, so a lot of people didn't really think that he should run or that he would have a chance of running. And so his brother decided, well, he's going to run anyway. He had no money, no volunteer infrastructure or anything like that. So he got all of his siblings and their friends to knock on doors for him every day after school. And for me, I was a little kid and I didn't know anything about politics or anything like that, but I thought it was a great idea because they fed us pizza every day after we knocked on doors. So I was like, oh, I can do that. We'll knock on doors, we'll go pizza, we'll drink soda, and everything like that. So we started doing this. I didn't know anything about it, but I learned so much about the process throughout the time of this campaign. Lo and behold, at the end of the election, on election night, my friend's brother actually won. He was the top vote getter in the entire city of people running for the city council, even though they're elected by districts.
How long was the campaign of knocking doors?
It was about 6 months.
Wow.
And he got more votes in his city council district than anyone else in the city, and he became a city councilman. And at that point, I was like, oh, wow, we did this. I can't believe we did this. And so then I started getting more interested in politics, and that's how I got involved with the Young Democrats, and I've been involved with them ever since.
Interesting. So you were able, as a young person, to see that your voice mattered, your efforts mattered, and it actually resulted in change.
Right.
Did he, where is he now, if I may ask?
So this is the crazy thing. So he went to the city council, he became president of the city council. He ran for mayor and lost, barely lost. He only lost by a few points. He went to the California State Assembly, which is similar to our House of Delegates. And by the time he got there, I think he was in his early 30s. By the time he got to the State Assembly, he was chairman of the Budget Committee.
Oh, wow.
One of the most powerful committees in California, all by the time he was 30. Now, I know in Montgomery County, people in Montgomery County are considering what term limits will do to their county government and things like this. Let me just tell you this. I'm very proud of my friend. I thought he was a great person. I thought he was awesome. And he should have went to the State Assembly and did everything that he did. But I do not believe that someone who is in their first term in the State Assembly at 30 should be chairman of the Budget Committee. And the reason why he became chairman of the Budget Committee is because California has term limits. And so by the time he was elected to the State Assembly, he was appointed to be chairman of the budget committee, this freshman assemblyman from Fresno that nobody ever knew was going to be in charge of writing the budget for the state. And that's what happens with term limits and things like that. But he served a good amount of time there. He chaired the budget committee, also chaired the taxation committee eventually later before retiring. He didn't serve out all of his terms. He retired, and so now I think he leads a lobbying firm or something in California, a healthcare lobbying firm.
Interesting. So that's what inspired you. You came to the Washington metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And you're involved in education as well.
That's what got me to come here. I came here in 2005. At that time, I was still in college, but I was blogging and writing and talking about urban education and its impact on young African American men at the time. And I was on a panel at this superintendent's forum that Dr. Janey, who was superintendent of DC's public schools at the time, was at. And afterwards, he came up to me and said that he enjoyed my presentation, and we talked for a little bit, and then he told me that I didn't know anything about what I was talking about. And if I wanted to learn what I was talking about and to be more informed about what I was talking about, then he would give me a job to come and teach in DC. And I left the panel. I was thinking, whatever, they paid me to be here, you paid to be here, so evidently I must know something. And I never thought about it until like a few weeks later. His secretary called me and said, Dr. Janey wanted me to get your address. Even though it was 2005, at that time people still mailed stuff. So he wanted me to get your address to mail you this application. And I was like, oh, for what? And she's like, for this job. And I said, okay. So I gave it to her. I didn't think much about it. The application came. And something in me just said, do it. And I did it. I took the job, and I came, and my first job was teaching kindergarten in Berry Farms, in one of DC's more porous, roughest areas, for summer school. That's my first job, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. So in hindsight, with the perspective that you have now, do you think he was correct in his assertion regarding your presentation that day? I
think he was totally correct. I didn't know what I was talking about at all. I didn't understand. I was, and I still am a huge believer in school reform and teacher accountability and education accountability. I'm a huge believer in that. But I also believe that there are more things at play than just how effective the teacher is in the classroom.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you just said, elaborate upon what else is in play beyond what the teacher is doing in the classroom, and kind of how your vision has changed from that original time where you viewed yourself as an expert, you were presenting on a panel as an expert, you were blogging, and then now, having been a teacher, now being a vice principal of a private school, how has your perspective changed? What are some of the problems facing urban education in America, especially for minorities?
So what I was talking about then was the need to get rid of ineffective teachers, the need to hold teachers accountable for their students' success or failure. And I still deeply believe in that. I do believe that teachers need to be held accountable for what they do and what they don't do in the classroom. However, I do believe that it's more nuanced than what I was talking about at the time. I do believe that a student who comes to school who has not eaten dinner or breakfast is not going to be able to focus on geometry, algebra, or even multiplication. They're not going to be able to do it because they haven't eaten. They don't have the nutrition to eat. Or if the police raided their home last night, they're not going to want to read about William Shakespeare. Or if something has happened to their parents or something happened to their brother, or if they have to figure out how they're going to leave school and go pick up their younger siblings in order before their younger sibling, before it's too late, then they're not going to be able to focus on, they're not going to care about the fact that you've asked them to stay after school for detention because they know that they have to go and pick up their younger sibling by 4 o'clock, and detention isn't over until 4:30. And so how all of these outside collaborators play into the minds of children and the role of a teacher in the classroom to educate that child. Those things are hugely important, and that's why in my work that I currently do at my current school and work that I do when I go and travel and speak about the need for community schools or collaborative education or a holistic approach to education, it has to include the need for schools to see themselves as a part of the community, for teachers to see themselves as a part of a child's existence, and to involve themselves in the child's overall life.
So I hear two things there. I hear that poverty plays a role or lack of poverty plays a role in the student's success in an academic environment. And then I heard you also talk about community engagement and how to engage the entire community in a child's welfare. And a subset of that welfare is education. So can you talk a little bit about how you're engaging communities to raise all boats on the one hand, on the other hand, what the role of poverty is in education?
Poverty is plays a huge factor in education. I mean, kids who are hungry, kids who lack housing security, families who lack economic security, all of those things play a huge role in not only students' access to the tools that they need to be successful, but also their feeling of safety and security in order to focus on their academics. And so that's a huge role. As far as community engagement, one of my kids, my school here is here in the Anacostia, Congress Heights area, and a few months ago there was a lot of violence in this community, right in this community. A lot of young people were losing their lives over the summer. There were a lot of killings, and we would talk about it at school, and we would talk about it with our kids and things like that. And then one of the kids said to me, well, the difference is that when school's over, you get to go home. This is not your home. You get to go home. And I thought about that. And I thought about the fact that, when I'm at home watching the news about what has happened in this community, not only are these my kids living in this community, but also the fact that the people who lost their lives, they knew them. These are their neighbors. These are their kids that they went to school with and grew up with and things like that were now dead in acts of violence. And I thought about that. And so now we do a lot of different things here. So for instance, I've decided that I need to spend more time here it is Sunday. I'm in my office in the school, but also we do a lot of things in the community. So for instance, there's a giant grocery store up the street. I hate the giant grocery store, I really do, because it's always so crowded. There are never enough clerks in the store and things like that. But I do all of my shopping at that grocery store, and it has never failed me that every time I am in that store, one of my students is in that store with their families, and their families are always able to see me in the store. It reminds me a lot of times of some of the things I need to tell the parents, or the questions that the parents can now ask me because they saw me at the grocery store. I go to a lot of the churches here in the community. When there are big community events here, our staff, we go to them, and just the idea of us being there with no agenda, we're just there, so that the parents and the students can see us there in their community outside of the classroom has opened a lot of opportunities for us. And on the flip side of that, we often do have strategic community outreach where we work with community partners in this area to serve our students. So we bring in people to help our families with their housing issues, with their economic issues. We make sure, before we started the podcast, I was talking to you about making sure my students have Metro passes and things like that. We do all of those things to make sure that when our students are here, they can focus on math, science, social studies, and not necessarily worry about what's going on outside the building.
So I work in healthcare, and we have a notion of whole person care. It seems as though you have a notion in education of whole person education, meaning this is a human being. Part of their day they are a student, but then they are also a son and a brother and a cousin and a neighbor and a member and a congregant of a church and somebody who needs to go grocery shopping. And it sounds like what your approach to education is, the school is a significant part of the community, but it's part of a broader community, and what you're trying to do is integrate school into every other aspect of your students' lives. Does that resonate with you?
That is exactly what the whole person care, whole person education is a new word I've never thought about before, but that's definitely exactly what we believe. We believe in educating the whole child, and that includes their families.
So what motivates you? What drives you? Surely there are other ways that you could earn money if that were all that you are interested in. And surely there are other ways that you could have a job that wouldn't require you to go to a grocery store you don't like, or to work on a Sunday when it's beautiful outside. What is it that really engages you and drives you and motivates you to be engaged in education in Prince George's County?
I think what has helped me stay motivated to the work that I do is the idea that when I was in school, when I was in high school, and when I was in junior, well, more importantly, when I was in high school.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I had this one language arts teacher who cared. He cared about me, and I went to a huge high school in California. My high school had 3,500 kids.
Oh.
So when I come here in the D.C. area and they're like, oh, this huge school with like 1,200 kids, I was like, oh, wow, that's not really huge. 3,500 kids, and I was quiet and I was really shy and reserved. So I was one of those kids who fell under the radar a lot. But I had this language arts teacher who noticed that I was in his class, who took a care and concern that I was in this class and wanted to learn more about me and wanted to give me the tools to be the best that I could be. I think I think about him a lot when I do my work. I think about the fact that he had about 300 kids that he had to educate, and the fact that he took the time out to make sure that that my needs were being met. I think about that a lot when I'm here on a Sunday, and in order to not get down about my work. But I also think about the fact the other month there's a kid in Anacostia, outside Anacostia High School, who it was lunchtime, and I'm not exactly sure how the kid ended up outside the school, but kid shot and killed outside Anacostia High School on a lunch break. And I'm thinking to myself, if he had been in school, he would be alive. He would not be dead. Or there's a story in Chicago about how they have uniforms in the public school that the kid goes to in Chicago, and he went to school, but he was out of uniform. I think he didn't have a belt or a tie or something like that. The school sent him home. And before he could get back home, he was shot and killed by someone who lived in a rival neighborhood that he had to actually cross in order to get to the school. And I think about the way that we set up our education systems and how we make them not about the child. And if we made our schools more receptive and focus on our students, then they would learn more, they would be more successful, and they'd be safe. And these two boys, if they had been allowed to go into school, because the kid in Anacostia wasn't allowed to go into school, if they had been allowed to go to school, no matter what they had did or what rule they had broken or whatever, if the school had dealt with the issue in the school and kept the kid in the school, these two boys would be alive. And that's what we do here at my school, and that's what keeps me coming back to school. Because as a leader here at the school, member of the leadership team here at the school, what I'm always pushing here is that whatever our kids do, whatever their issues are, if we can do our best to keep them in school and help them learn how to solve their issues, then one, they're in a place where they can continue their education. Two, we know that they are safe. And so that's what keeps me doing my work.
So what would you say is the primary goal of your goal in this educational setting?
My goal is to make sure that our kids learn as much as they can and are on grade level or above grade level by the time they leave us. That when they leave us, that they are going to other educational environments that love them as much as we do, that will fight for them and their futures as much as we will, and most importantly, that they are safe. Every time we hear a story about a kid who has lost their life senselessly at such a young age, most of the time when you look in the history of the student, somewhere in there, some adult in there did not do something to make sure that they were safe. And my job, my passion is to make sure that they are safe.
I want to bring the conversation back for a moment to your mentor.
Okay.
It sounds like what he passed on to you was a sense of pay it forward, that he gave much to you when you were in need. And so it sounds to me like you feel obliged to pass it forward to somebody else that they may perpetuate the cycle. One, does that resonate with you? And two, are you still in touch with him?
So I talk to him not as much as I would like to talk to him. I most of the time talk to him when I think it's just not going well, and I just always think about how I could do something else, how I can make more money doing something else, and that's a lot of times when I'll talk to him. So I should talk to him more. But that's life. But I do believe that he has instilled into me a vision so he talks about this African proverb about our African ritual, where people would greet each other, and the way they greet each other is they would ask, how are the children? And that's how you knew about the health of the village, is that the children were well. And he always talks about this belief that if the children are well, then the community is well, then the village is well, then we are well. And I try to remember that every single day, is that if our children are doing well here, then this community will do well, and the city will do well, and we all will be well. But if our children aren't safe, if they aren't learning, if they aren't healthy, then we have huge problems. And I think that is something that we see across our politics, across our government, and every part of this country, is that oftentimes the children are not being taken care of.
Now, we're nearing the end of the podcast. I'd like to create a connection between your dedication to the field of education and also your involvement in democratic politics in the state of Maryland. Can you talk a little bit more about how you view your role in each of those working together to advance the public interest?
So when I leave work here, a lot of times it's very late in the evening, I leave work here and go to a meeting or go to a rally or a dinner or something like that that's all about building the party, electing our candidates, and winning elections, or training people to run for office and win elections. And what I believe deeply is that our education system, which is probably not the best thing, but the health of our education system is wholly dependent on the fact that on the ability of us to elect competent, effective leaders who care about children. And if people care about children, if people care about the future of this country, then we'll make the right decisions on investing in our public education schools. We'll make the right decisions on making sure that our roads and bridges are safe because we want our children to go across them. We'll make the right decisions on food and clean water and air and things like that because they are for our children, they're not for us. And so that's what connects me to my work in democratic politics and being so active in democratic politics and pushing our party, the Democratic Party, to being better on those issues, because at the end of the day, if we make the right decisions for children, then we'll make the right decisions for our country.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for joining us today. That has been episode 18 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. In the words of Joseph Kitchen, you need to make sure that you dedicate yours. It's rewarding if you're able to pass on to the next generation or pass on to anyone else, to pay it forward. A lot of public service, according to Mr. Kitchen, is about being engaged and being involved in something that you believe in, taking a unique approach that resonates with you, and then making sure that when you have received, that you facilitate an opportunity for others to receive in kind. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.